Good morning or evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm Barlow Keener. I'm an attorney with Phillips Lytle, and I'm honored today to have Brian Darr with Ookla on our podcast, the Phillips Lytle podcast. Just a quick snapshot about our firm. We have 180 lawyers. I'm located in New York City, but we have attorneys Chicago and Buffalo, where our main office is. Our firm has been involved with telecommunications infrastructure since the early 90s. We have a team of 25 attorneys that handle towers across the country, cell towers, fiber optic, and data centers. And I'm part of that telecommunications team, the infrastructure team. So I'm really pleased that Brian could join us today. I've known Brian for several years. I call him up and ask him this and that and the other regarding towers, and he's a fascinating person in his own right, other than all the stuff that he's done. And I'll just give you a quick intro, Brian. Brian is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Ookla, and he focuses on federal, state, and local government programs and policy. He speaks at all the conferences that I go to. I've seen him in Barcelona speaking at Mobile World Congress. He attended, just as background, Rhodes College in Memphis, which is now Southwestern College, if I'm not Southwest. And we crossed paths because I was at Swanee, which is on the other side of the state, and we used to compete. He also went to Macaulay High School, where my father and my cousin, my uncle, everybody went when I was a youngster. So I really appreciate it. Macaulay was private at the time. It just left its military status. So I'm sure he had to wear a tie. Brian has been in the telecom industry since 1985. He started at Cellular One in Memphis, and he focused on roaming. For those of you that don't know, roaming is where one provider with or subscriber, you have a cell phone, and you go into a different area not covered by your carrier, like a rural area, and that rural area charges a certain amount of money back to your subscriber, if it would be Verizon or AT&T, and that's roaming. And roaming is a mystery that only telecom lawyers and some of the internal financial people in the industry consult with, but it's sort of the magic that got him to found Mosaic in 1988. He was all called American Roamer. And what Mosaic did was you downloaded an application onto your phone, and Brian can correct me on all this, but I know from the past using it, and it would tell you test your speed, but it would also give Brian information about what cell tower you were connected to, and what spectrum was being used, and what carrier was being used, and how many people where they were able to get service and where they weren't. So it gave a really great information. And Ookla bought Brian in 2018, brought Mosaic, I'm sorry, but Brian. And so Mosaic is doing the same thing, but they do it globally, across the globe. And it's actually fascinating. They give out awards. I've seen it at Mobile World Congress with bells ringing and music playing to governments across the world, showing and carriers how well they serve in particular countries. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit also. But Brian, just to continue on, Brian, you're a member, he's a member of CTIA, which for those of you that don't know, it's the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association. It's a really powerful lobbying, or not lobbying group, but association of cellular companies. And he's a member of the Connected Infrastructure Working Group. He's also participates in WIA, the Wireless Internet Association, and which we also are sponsors of and participate in. It's a really fabulous association of tower owners across the country. And he's a board member of the Wireless History Foundation. So he has a huge liberal arts head and thought process. So Brian and I want to talk about today, and what I'm very curious, since Brian covers the country, knows where the gaps are in the U.S., is the lack of cell phone service in rural America. And Brian, if you don't mind, I'm just going to give a couple of stats there. Anyway, hello, good to see you there.
Hello, Barlow. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm very pleased. The just the very top level, this is something dear to both my thinking and heart, and Brian's also. We've got in the U.S. 4.1 million miles of public roads. There are 330,000 miles that have no coverage for cell phone service. But if you break that down, a lot of that is dirt roads, I call them, non-paved roads. But 2% of estimated of federal interstate highways, those are the big 5-lane, 4-lane highways that we all drive on, 2% of those highways do not have cell phone service. So that is 1,500 estimated, 1,500 miles, 1,500 miles where you could be out on those highways and have no cell phone service. 5% of the state roads, which you're familiar with, that are paved, don't have cell phone service, which is 60,000 miles of the 1.2 total million miles. It's a lot of miles. So you have no cell phone service. If you break down, run out of gas, have a wreck, medical emergency, which we're going to talk about. And then of the unpaved roads, there are 270,000 miles that are not covered of the 2.8 million miles. So most of those roads aren't covered. And I don't really drive. I live in Boston and work in New York. I don't drive on those roads except when I go to Vermont. And there are a lot of unpaved roads, which are very well, you can drive fast on them if you want to, but where there's no cell phone service. So it's a big issue, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But Brian, I thought maybe it'd be a good idea, since I described Ookla to a degree, if you could, tell folks, what Ookla is and what you're doing there, it's a high level before we dive into the rural issue.
Sure. Yeah, and let me just, since you've talked a little bit about the history here, let me mention that first. So, as Barlow mentioned, I founded a company called American Roamer that was later rebranded to Mosaic, and we did the roaming guides that would tell you how to use your phone when you traveled. And when we started, there was no rural service at all. It was it was strictly metropolitan areas. And those books that we printed would tell you how to use your phone when you traveled. And ultimately, we got into the mapping business and started keeping track of both coverage and towers at Mosaic. And then we were acquired by Ookla back in 2018. Now, Ookla started in 2006 as a application that you could use in your browser to go take a speed test. But as the application world started to take off, particularly with the iPhone introduction in 2007, then those applications became extraordinarily popular. And so I'll share a little bit of information here about Ookla, and just to give you an idea of just the scale associated with the data that's being collected. Speed test is what we're best known for. We see about 11 million tests each day that are consumer initiated. Someone actually opening the app either on their phone or sometimes on their computer and taking a test, a throughput test. That's from about 600 million or more installs globally that we see. We've had over 60 billion tests to date. Down Detector is another service that we offer that's also crowdsourced. Sometimes people take a speed test when they're having a bad experience. It's often not the ISP's fault. It's the service that they're trying to reach. But we are, in addition to these speed tests, capturing an extraordinary amount of RF information in terms of the actual signal strength, signal quality that the device is seeing. And from that, we are then creating maps that can show you where the signal is good, where the signal is poor, And we're just showing some examples here on the screen, but this gets extraordinarily detailed. We can break this down by, of course, individual operator, 3G, 4G, 5G networks. We see the types of equipment that are actually capturing these devices, whether or not they have modern chipsets. Can they see a 5G network? That's important to be able to differentiate. And then ultimately, we can map tower locations and get very, very close to where the actual RANs are located.
Yeah,
And
because
so I'm,
you're
yeah.
seeing it from all sides and they all point back to the tower. So you know where the tower is. Is that pretty much how you know the tower locations?
Yeah, we do collect the actual tower information, the asset information from the tower owners and managers, and we can overlay that with the data that's coming back directly from the phones. So we've got a pretty good idea. We can tell pretty closely, AT&T's got a tower right here in this area, Verizon's got a tower in this area, and it's global. I mean, this data set, really covers, every developed or even semi-developed country, around the world.
Yeah. And so like with your data set, for example, which I think is pretty cool, you can show the tower. And if there's a hill, this is called propagation in our world. But if there's a hill blocking signals from getting to the other side of that hill, it'll show that you lose some connectivity on the other side of the hill. Is that right?
Yeah, we actually can calculate the loss in dB, and that then translates to the map as different colors, where you can see the areas that have got a hot signal and areas that have a cool signal. And we can also indicate an area where where we're seeing the signal, but it's so faint, it's so poor that it really falls into the effectively no service, category. And, breaking that down by individual operator, then overlaying all of that together, and you can really see where no one has any coverage at all. And from a public safety standpoint, this is a big deal. 911 does allow you to use, operators other than just your own. That is a requirement. But if you have no service, if you have no operator at all, then it's not just an inconvenience, it's a public safety issue.
Yeah. And, at least, I think living in a urban area that I always have cell phone service until I head out on the road and suddenly I don't have cell phone service. And, I think, well, maybe someone who has, I have one carrier, my friends may have another. In fact, this all came out, the idea that we needed to really cure this came from a law school friend of mine, and I drove up to his hometown north of Syracuse, right up near the St. Lawrence River, near a town called Gouverneur, which I'd never heard of before. Uh, and it's on the edge of the Adirondacks Park, which I'll leave out because they can't build towers in the Adirondacks Park, I understand. But we were on main state roads, not interstate, but 4-lane state roads, and there was all kinds of trucks and farmers and people and schools. There's no cell phone service for miles. And I just thought, and that's New York, mind you. I'm not talking about Idaho or South Dakota, where you may be on a paved road and not have, if we'd have broken down or one of those trucks had broken down, there'd been an emergency, a wreck, there'd been no one to be able to call for help. So Brian, if you want to pull up one of your maps showing sort of some of the, issues, in the rural area, that's what it's fascinating that you actually have data.
Yeah, in this instance, I'm going to show Colorado, and not surprisingly, very mountainous. It's challenging to cover, no question about it. And I've just overlaid the 4G service for Colorado to start with here, and you can see where you've got excellent, good, fair, poor coverage, or where we're really seeing a no signal area. The areas in white indicate that where there's really no data coming back from there, and that's not surprising. There are areas where really no one goes, in very remote areas of the mountains. But when you look at some of the 5G service that's been rolled out, and I'll show that here as a comparison, 5G has improved service across Colorado, but you still see a lot of areas showing through as poor signal or even no signal readings. And this is critical. I mean, people are going here. We wouldn't be seeing readings from these areas if people weren't actually taking their devices into them. And clearly this area could benefit from additional investment. And I think this data that we're collecting bears that out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and you have another map because those lines that you're seeing out there are not highway lines, but except for I can see 75 on there, the major state highways. Uh,
Okay.
you have another more granular map that shows this pretty well.
Yeah, I'll pull that up here next.
There's the anecdotal evidence like mine, but Brian actually has the hard evidence. And we're going to talk about the reasons for this in a few minutes. There are good reasons why the coverage is not out there. But Brian,
So
go ahead and explain this map. This is a cool map.
So here's just a study area, and you can see that from the points that are on the map where we've estimating the location of the individual operators, and where they're located. Yeah, where you're seeing the red areas are where we've just selected where we're seeing very, very poor signal strength. So the rest of the signal strength has been pulled away from this map just so that we can see the areas that have signal but are very poor. And then these areas that are the hexagons match up with the FCC broadband data collection map. So being able to capture this information and being able to visualize it can really give everybody a good indication of what areas need to be given serious consideration for infrastructure investment.
Yeah, the broadband map that's wireline only. Is that, well? I mean, fixed wireless also, but fixed wireless and wireline. That's not mobile service, right?
There's a map for each. There's a map for each, and the fixed wireless service has gotten a lot of attention because of BEAD, not surprisingly. But there's a mobile service map as well, where each of the operators reports not only what they cover, but also what speeds that they believe that they have within a given area. And there is a challenge process available, but it's been underutilized.
Yeah. So this is the map where the carriers have said we have service in the blue dots, right?
Right.
And then the
And
red is where you've detected service areas, or is that the area that doesn't have service?
well, it's a little bit of a reverse view here in this particular instance, because the red areas are areas where we have specifically defined that there's very, very poor service there. Okay.
I see.
And we've pulled the rest of the coverage actually off the map. These are areas that are just identified as poor coverage, yet they overlay areas that are claimed by the operators to have coverage. And we think that you may get a signal there, but you may not actually be able to reach the minimum speeds that the FCC requires.
Yeah, yeah. And you have another map there that you have with the shows the towers and the locations. These are the community service areas. They used to call them in BEAD, BTOP CIAs or CAIs. There we go.
Yeah, now in this case, this doesn't actually show the towers, but it shows community anchor institutions such as schools, fire departments,
Yeah,
police departments, et cetera. And then the underlay to this is actually population density, so that you can see, pretty clearly where there is, a not insignificant number of people in an area, but the service, may not be quite adequate.
yeah. And I like this map because it really shows. Go ahead, Brian, on this one.
Yeah, and then here we've actually got you can see the tower location just represented as dots on here, but then the population is again shown as an underlay in the blue colors with the all providers combined coverage overlaid on top of that. And this area just pulled out of the map shows there's quite a lot of people here relative to what you would expect in terms of service, which is pretty much non-existent across some of these areas. And this may be a relatively new community. That's not uncommon for a new neighborhood to get built out, or the homes in the area are just a little too far apart, and the density may not be quite high enough to attract the investment.
Yeah, but the blue dots are where population is, and if it's not covered by, I call it green, then they have poor cell phone service. Is that what I'm
Yeah,
reading that right?
the blue hexagons indicate population. And this is not a super high dense area. To get to the darkest blue, you'd need to go to, Manhattan or, downtown Chicago or something. But this indicates that there's still a, fair number of people living in this area that don't seem to have adequate connectivity from their wireless devices.
Yeah, and Brian, where is this? I see a lake and a highway. What area is this?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Don't you
I
recognize the
think
lake?
I believe this is in New Hampshire.
Okay, so that would make sense since I drive up there to New Hampshire and I have no cell phone service, and all those homes are connected that by roads. Or the population is based on where the roads are because you got to get to your house on a road. So
Yes.
could be dirt roads there, could be paved roads. Um, so this brings up. Let's go diving into the problem a little bit, and I just want to say before we get into the problem, which is money and capital, is there are around 40 and maybe a little less what we call facilities-based mobile carriers that are small and they're across the country. These aren't the big three that everybody knows. And they serve these rural areas and have served them from some of them since 1985 when the FCC first gave for free spectrum to different providers, often the cell phone, the wireline company serving the community. And they've been serving the community ever since. They have towers, they have what we call radios or macro radios that blast out cell phone service to the areas. Most of it's 4G because it's a big lift financially to go to 5G. And these companies are supported by the other, by all of us who pay into a fund called the Universal Service Fund. And that Universal Service Fund, a portion of it goes out to these small rural carriers so that when you go out into those areas that are served, you're able to have service. Without that subsidy, there would be no service. Same with your post office and, similar idea. And the highway is paid not by local people, the local community, but it's paid by the majority of the citizens who live in the big cities. So, and that's true for airports, post offices, highways, and also electric services and telecommunications, both wireline and mobile. So somehow or another, the government has to step in and help in these areas because for a carrier who's there to make a profit, to build a tower in one of these areas, they are not going to make any money from that tower. It's going to cost them more it's going to cost them more to build it and to maintain it than it is for them to get revenue from it. So
In the
there's
very
a money
early
problem.
days, yeah, and
Go
in
ahead,
the
Brian.
very early days of the industry, of course, you had hundreds of operators that have largely been consolidated up into what we think of as the big three today. But these rural operators that still exist cover a very significant part of the country. They also, it's the only area they can invest in. They don't have a Miami, they don't have a Dallas, they don't have a Los Angeles, and so their investment all goes into the area that they actually cover. So quite often in these areas, you're going to see that these rural operators offer significantly better coverage than the coverage that may overlay them from the big three operators. But the big three do still use them for roaming, but the economics have changed dramatically. The way that the economics worked to build out so much of the rural area, even though we don't have it all covered as we're talking about today, so much of the rural area was covered through roaming fees. And going back to the roaming guides that I mentioned, and how we got started, included in the booklets in terms of how to use your phone when you traveled was also the cost of using your phone. That was included in those initial roaming guides. And the pressure was on pretty hard to get those prices down. It was very expensive to go roam, just like it's quite expensive to go roam internationally for many people today.
Yeah.
It was very expensive then just to go, to the neighboring city, the neighboring rural area, and certainly across the country. And so that's an important distinction here and an important change that's taken place in the industry that has made it much more difficult to go expand into these rural areas because it's no longer $3 a day and $1 a minute to use your phone when you go roaming into these areas where the larger operators don't currently cover.
Yeah, but and Brian, this is just a micro concept here
Mhm.
that roaming dollars are still being paid today by the carriers. We don't see them because we have these flat rates, but
They are.
they're not flat rates everywhere. If you go to Europe, you're paying by the minute or whatever it is. But in the US, you don't really see them. There's just this flat rate, but the roaming fees are still being paid, but they're less than they used to be. So
Exactly.
the rural carriers aren't getting subsidized, which they need to get to be able to stay in business with fees. And so let me just back up a little bit and say, well, what's the really big problem? Well, the really big problem, and Brian, you can correct me on this, is that CostQuest did a study back in 2021 or 20 tied to a FCC matter docket going forward, the 5G fund. And that cost study said it would cost $55 billion to cover the US so that when you drove out there, you would, on the roads I'm talking about, you'd be able to have coverage. And, that number, it could be 40, it could be 60, it's a big number to put towers up and then to have enough revenue, not enough revenue, but enough subsidy to pay for the operating expense once the tower is up. And so there's a bunch of ideas that are out there right now. The FCC has proposed, spending about $9 billion in this past docket. This I don't know, it's not moving forward very well. It's been very slow to go forward since I think it started in 2019 or 20, if I have to go back and look. But it's not happening. But $9 million was sort of allocated there, and everyone said, well, that's not going to be enough. But the other side said, well, it's a good start. We have another bucket of money that is out there, and this is the BEAD money, Broadband Access and Equity Diversity Program. Deployment, I'm sorry, BEAD. And there's $42 billion that was allocated for BEAD, and each of the states got a portion of that, and then they have right now fiber providers that bid on that to serve particular areas. But because of, I won't get into it, but eventually changes with the FCC and NTIA ended up with narrowing that down and allowing satellite Starlink to be part of that. And so only 21 billion of it got used or is being used today. It's just starting. But we've got another 21 billion, which is referred to as the non-deployment, the D on the end of BEAD, non-deployment funds. It's kind of a strange term, but that in the industry, that's what we call it, 21 billion. And there's been no commitment by NTIA about how that funds will be spent. By the way, Congress allocated all these funds to be spent on broadband. So we've got 21 billion there. We got 9 billion, that the federal government. So there is a bucket of money. And I wanted to say one other thing about this bucket of money part is that USDA, which serves farmers, also allocates funds. These are low cost loan funds to rural areas, targeted rural. They can't use these funds in an urban area for supporting farmers, but also broadband. Farmer Mac, which is one of the organizations, puts around $1 billion a year in these low cost funds in rural areas for broadband and other related digital infrastructure. And in addition to some $80 billion that go for building silos and that kind of thing. And USDA also loans money through the Rural Utilities Service, RUS. So there's a bunch of fund allocations that would be able to support the $55 billion that it would cost to build out there. And so I want to, Brian, get your thoughts on a project like that. And then we're going to go into Starlink in a little bit, but Brian's got, because that's we all know that that's come up. And but I'll just talk about how do we get this, suppose we move forward, how do we get this done as a country?
Well, you're exactly right, Barlow. There are several different buckets out there that could be used to make progress on this. So I'll start with the first one that you brought up, which is the $9 billion Rural 5G Fund. And the previous administration had looked at rolling that out, and like so many other things, COVID interfered. So that got delayed. And then as the BEAD program started rolling out, then there was actually an ask from many people in the industry, not everybody, but a lot of people in the industry thought, hey, look, if we're going to be putting new fiber backhaul out to a lot of areas of the country, that could really lower the cost of putting a rural tower out there and could stretch these dollars that much further. It makes sense if you think that through. If you only have to run, a few hundred feet of fiber from the road as opposed to miles of fiber where it didn't exist before, then you could stretch those dollars a little further. But that's also provided an opportunity to delay the 5G fund just that much longer. And so as the BEAD program ultimately is rolling out, and we're just starting to see some builds on it, as there's a better understanding of where that fiber is actually going to be and a confidence level that it is actually going to get built, not just planned, then I think we'll start to see more pressure on the FCC to fire up that rural 5G fund and start getting that money rolling out. The non-deployment funds with BEAD, we've been waiting on guidance from NTIA, and it's been delayed several times. Of course, the guidance we knew that was going to change as the new administration came in, but it has been delayed longer than I think anybody really anticipated. And as we do have approximately $21 billion left over within that fund, there's a lot of competition in terms of thought of where those dollars should go. And it's also important to remember that the federal government, other than their guidance, is not going to have full authority or full decision making on what that money is spent on, perhaps. Until that guidance comes out, we don't know. But there's a lot of people that want to see it used for wireless and improvement in rural wireless service. And we're working with quite a few state broadband offices who are very much want to prioritize that. But you have workforce development concepts out there. You have middle mile fiber needs that still exist. Resiliency is another topic. Do we have one line, running out into a rural area, or is it part of a ring where we could continue if there's a fiber cut? So all of these competing concepts, not to mention, many people want to see that spent on expanding availability of equipment and learning, to areas and to people that don't, even if they have access to broadband, don't necessarily know how to use it. So that $21 billion has got a lot of people pulling on it in different directions. But hopefully,
not to mention, buildings downtown serving the poor have copper still in them. And so, some of those funds, could be allocated towards putting fiber in those buildings. But
absolutely, indoor coverage is a separate but important topic and a lot of people are trying to contend with really how to do that in multi-tenant units, as well as even in commercial buildings where coverage it can be very poor. But I don't see any of those dollars being directed toward the commercial building sector.
Right. So the real problem is that public safety. This is really, I understand from one public safety organization, state organization, that if they use cell phone chips in their computers to be able to communicate back and get information about what vehicle that they're following and their license plate, and whether that's a good guy or bad guy. They're out in the middle of nowhere by themselves, the officer, and they want to look it up, and there's no cell phone service. Well, they won't pull that car over if they don't know who's in that car, and they'll wait and wait until they get into cell area. And then there's a whole issue that we talked about before regarding having a wreck or having a medical emergency or just breaking down in the middle of the night in a freezing night, and there's no cell phone service out on our highways. Not to mention, a home that's way up in the middle of the mountains. There's no cell phone service on our highways. And so to me, it just seems like that's something that the country needs to sort of think about. How do we solve that problem? And it's only a problem for most of the policymakers don't live out in the middle of the country, or in terms of, I don't mean the middle of the country, but out in far from a urban area. So, if they did, they would be thinking about this problem a little bit more, I think. And
Well, Barlow, we do talk to, look, lawmakers in urban areas may not be able to relate to this as much, but if you go talk to senators or U.S. House representatives who spend a lot of time in their communities and have these, in some cases, very large constituent areas. Some of these congressional districts are huge, and there are areas that they know that the coverage is very poor because they're driving around and listening to their constituents when they go home. So there is certainly within Congress a fair number of folks that have got a lot of sympathy for the need for improving service in these areas. And you mentioned roads and gave some statistics at the very beginning of this, but you also talked about the agriculture department. It's not just roads that need coverage. It's areas that are under cultivation. It's areas where we are raising livestock. You've got IoT devices on animals that can actually check their movement and predict when they're going to get sick. And we certainly need connectivity to these machines that are out here, on the farmland, bringing in the wheat harvest, bringing in the corn harvest, the soybean harvest, and so forth. They all need connectivity too.
Yeah, so I understand, John Deere has a fully autonomous goal mission, for all their vehicles to be fully autonomous. And they've turned to Starlink, that's public, in the past, to get connectivity out on some of these vehicles. But cell phone service would be far superior in terms of bandwidth and availability. I mean, we can talk about Starlink in a minute, but what this could do is you could have an RFP or you could have an auction process, which is what often happens with federal dollars, just like in the BEAD program, or an auction of spectrum. And you could auction that off to infrastructure providers, as opposed to in the past, areas of spectrum are offered to carriers who are delivering the radio service to your mobile phone. But this could be an infrastructure offering to tower companies to be able to build and get subsidized by the federal government or paid by the federal government to build in these areas. And also to put neutral host radios, which, Brian, you're very familiar with. Maybe you could sort of talk about that a little bit, but those neutral host radios would allow just one radio and antenna up on the tower that all the carriers could access. And the sort of side part of that is some of the rural cell phone providers could be that entity that gets subsidized straight out. You have a tower, you're going to put up a radio that will allow any carrier to use your tower. So these are just concepts that would allow, because you don't want three carriers building a tower or going up on a tower with their radios. It would be just a waste of money out there where there's no money being made off of a tower. In other words, there's not enough subscribers using that tower to be able to pay the carrier to make it profitable. So, Brian, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You get into these areas that are just very remote, and there's no real justification to have multiple carriers out there. And there's actually a really good example of this just north of the border from us in Canada, where you've got, most of the population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border, but Canada is vast. And many years ago, you had Bell and TELUS decide we're not going to build out this entire country ourselves. And so they made the decision to actually do network sharing. And so this has been going on for, I don't even remember the year, I mean, well over a decade, that you've had two operators that just combine forces to say, yeah, there needs to be competition in these areas, but we're going to, for many of these sites, we're just going to share them. So there's precedent for this very nearby. You're also going to have, there's one other bucket of money that I should mention that can help with this, and that is FirstNet, because FirstNet has its own budget to go build out additional towers. And in areas where it's sort of, they'd like to have their own coverage, but it hasn't been quite economical because there wasn't a tower there and nobody wanted to be the first to build. FirstNet, as they have built new towers, have actually drawn the other operators, Verizon and T-Mobile, onto those towers as well. And so, but there are going to continue to be areas where even that doesn't make sense. And just having a shared infrastructure.
Yeah, the tower is not just the cost for the carrier; it's the radio that they put up on the tower. And like you said, in Canada, you have just one radio on the tower that serves all the carriers.
I think there's a related issue here that's worth mentioning, and that there's some towers today that some of these rural operators we were talking about before have been operating for a number of years that were subsidized in their initial build and are no longer supported. In some respects, kind of like BEAD. There's a lot of universal service funding out there that actually, most universal service funding is going to subsidize the ongoing operations to provide service there. BEAD funding is only subsidizing the infrastructure build and will not support the operations of that build going forward. So that's an important consideration as we talk about all of these things, is that if it's provided to operate or to expand mobile service using BEAD dollars, there won't be any ongoing operational support either. And so at what point does that impact whether or not an area can still be supported long term?
Yeah, the OpEx piece of it, and running the radio, and I want to sort of shift over to another topic that is Starlink, and so this comes. And Brian, you got some great maps we're going to dive into, but there was an anecdotal story that was told earlier in the year, in this winter, where a town in, I think it was in California, Oregon, one of those towns, they wanted to put a cell tower up, and the board said, we don't need a cell tower because we have Starlink. The satellite will take care of us. And so there's pushback, from the town. Of course, towns have often not wanted to have a tower. It can be unsightly for us. I love seeing towers, but for right, but for others, they don't, and it means that you get service. But there's been pushback. So, and a lot of folks that I know who are not in the telephone industry, they talk to me about Starlink, and they see the little icon pop up when they get on the plane or they're out of service. So tell me about, you've studied Starlink. I want to educate us on what you've seen. So how this intersects with our problem that we're talking about.
So these new satellite technologies are amazing. And let's just start with that. I mean, the idea that you can get any kind of connectivity out in an area that had none before is something that we should be thrilled about and pleased about.
It saved lives, right?
It absolutely has. The ability to see that SOS pop up on your phone when you're out hiking, in an area where help is a long way away, and communication did not exist prior to this. That's an enormous advance that we should all appreciate. All networks, though, have got capacity constraints. I don't care if it's fiber network. How many strands do you have? How much data can you actually, carry over that network, at a given moment? And that's going to be impactful for these satellite networks as well. Now, Starlink's putting up a lot more satellites. There's additional companies coming. Amazon Leo isn't all that far from commercialization. I think we're talking later this year. We've got AST Space Mobile, and they really are a mobile play. Whereas the Starlink constellation that exists today, at least, really is more of a fixed service, even though there are some mobile applications associated with it, texting in particular. But it's not really a mobile service, at least at this time. And I think that's an important distinction. If you've got the actual Starlink aperture, the device that they ship out to the home or the business, and mount it on your roof, for instance, then you've got a plane. Think of it like about this size that can actually talk to the satellite back and forth. Whereas the antenna in the phone is quite small and quite thin, and the satellite is going to have a hard time hearing it even though the antenna might be able to pick up the satellite, it's got to go the other direction as well. So you can't just add more spectrum or add more power to the satellite and solve the problem, because there is a maximum power output and on the devices that everyone's carrying around every day.
Yeah.
So you really got to have some significant improvements in the technology before
Brian,
you've really solved that problem.
AST, I think, and Starlink probably also, they're able to send voices up and down. We've gotten that far. So you're able to get voice and some data, but it's just not the same as watching the football game on your phone that you might do.
And I think they have different approaches to the market. And Starlink clearly, wanted to focus on improving rural fixed connectivity first, and that was and Amazon Leo has certainly accepted a number of awards from the states to do the same thing. They also have, Amazon has a lot of delivery trucks. There's, there's a lot that's going to take place on these networks, and I think even if the technology works the way that they're talking about, the capacity of the network is important. And as you're going to put more people in these very remote areas through the BEAD program on these satellite networks, that's going to use up some of their capacity, right? How much more capacity is left over for actual mobile services? And we don't know the answer to that question yet. But as the country grows, as communities as people can move into rural areas and have good connectivity, it's going to draw more people into these areas. There's going to be points where you're just going to have improved terrestrial connectivity in order to be able to handle the amount of demand for capacity within these areas. And mobile and fixed are two very different things in terms of your ability to talk to a small satellite. And the larger satellites coming out from AST Mobile, we would expect, and this technology has not been launched commercially yet, but we would expect that, those will have some improvements on the mobile capabilities. But this is all nascent in terms of using this as you're driving down the interstate at 70 miles an hour.
Yeah, you have a great map, or not map, but stats on this, which I saw at the Connectex show in Fort Lauderdale last month. It was fascinating.
Yeah, let me share one more slide here, and hopefully you can see that, Barlow. But
yep, perfectly.
The dots that you see on the map, these are not speed tests. These are RF readings. We picked the Appalachian area. This is an area that gets a lot of federal attention because of high poverty levels, in part because it's very difficult to traverse. It's very mountainous. It's very difficult to cover with terrestrial service. And so this actually shows where the devices the consumers are driving around with have dropped off of T-Mobile's terrestrial network and connected to Starlink. And so, not surprisingly, it's right along the Appalachian Mountains, even though you do see spots well outside of that that can also be difficult to cover, or the cell towers are just not close enough together, and you're going to have problems really anywhere across the country. But where we're seeing concentrations of it, high concentrations of it, are in areas that are very mountainous, or
Yeah.
just very low populations, tribal areas, things of that sort.
I have one question, but at first the thought is that I follow the what's going on with AI very carefully, day by day and week by week. And one of my thoughts is, hey, listen, with AI, we're going to create an antenna in the phone that's going to solve the problem because our phones are, just not big enough. And by the way, here's I don't know if you can see it. My phone, everybody has one. They've started with little metal antennas. It used to be like a wire, I think, went around, and then they built it into the boards. But there are antennas in your phone, just like a TV antenna up on top of your roof. So that's a problem that could be really solved. I mean, we've solved a lot of problems, in terms of connectivity up to the satellites. But so here's my question, and I think I know your answer. The terrestrial versus Starlink issue, should we, and I don't think, should we slow down our idea of putting more cell towers out in these rural areas where they have to be subsidized by the government, to wait for Starlink to solve the problem in the rural areas, or should we just move forward the best we can as a country to cover these rural unserved roads? I'll start with roads, and put funding out there to do it.
Barlow, if you've looked at any of the estimates of data usage growth over the next decade, and AI is going to be a significant part of that, and is going to be a major driver, but so is, just communications with more and more devices, autonomous vehicles, drones, robots. And it all sounds like science fiction a few years ago, but we're starting to see a lot of this come into reality. And even if these satellite players can handle a significant amount of additional data throughput than what they can today, and I have no doubt that that's coming, I don't know
Yeah.
that it's going to be enough.
Yeah.
When you start looking at, I think we need terrestrial and satellite, and that's terrestrial wireless, and we're going to need more fiber. We're going to need more backhaul. This is an enormous amount of growth that we're going to see. And if everything were static and the data growth wasn't coming, then I think you could say, okay, satellite might be able to handle this once their technology gets improved a bit and their spectrum allotment increases. But the data growth, just that we're going to have all of it, in order to be able to just handle the capacity requirements. And that's in the urban areas, that's out here in the rural areas, that's on farms, that's on roads. The number of, I was just at a public safety conference, and they said the number of drones that we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years are going to increase by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just in the public safety sector. That's not Amazon delivery. That's not FedEx. That's just the public safety sector. And so we've got to get prepared for this, and improving our rural coverage is a big part of that.
Yeah. So, how do you think, if you had to go and sit down with a Congress or NTIA or the FCC or all of them, all the above, you're a policy person and you're out there talking to them all the time, going up, on the 8th floor, as we used to call it. What would you say to them to solve this problem? Or would it be incremental, or how would you say to fund it and to move it forward?
Well, clearly we've got a few funding mechanisms in place today, and the first thing is let's get these things started, right? I mean, there's already money aside. set aside. NTIA needs to hopefully, and they will in the next sometime in the next few months, give us this guidance on BEAD. The FCC needs to start looking now at the Rural 5G Fund, and not wait until BEAD's completed. That's going to take several years. We need to start looking at where are we expecting build out based upon the current plans, and start working toward the Rural 5G Fund actually getting out, maybe starting this next year, 18 months. So that's where we start. Now, in addition to other funding mechanisms, certainly there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of mood in Congress right now to spend much more money on things like this, but I think it's going to be pretty critical for the transportation sector. There are, in addition to the agriculture department, we're out here trying to improve our roads. All of this fiber that can go into the right of way, utilities that can supply the energy necessary to run these systems can go into the right of way, and so maybe the transportation department could get involved. Certainly, where it involves federal roads, that could help make it just that much less costly to build out some of these areas or reach some of these communities.
Yeah,
So there's a number of different ways to look at this, because connectivity is going to support all of this. It's going to support everything that we do. And so it's going to be important to rural healthcare. It's going to be important to veterans. There's a lot of different things that communications ultimately support.
yeah,
And I think it needs to be viewed in that manner.
yeah, because there are a bunch of buckets. I mean, you mentioned DOT, which is a great, they a lot of funding goes to DOT. There's disfunding in all these areas, but instead of when they build out or repave a section of the interstate or a state highway, funding could also say we're going to put fiber in a tower there, in that. And there's been talk about doing that, but there needs to be maybe a group, a movement, that says, hey, this is very important for America going forward. Otherwise, when you go out into the area and you don't have cell phone service, that area is going to be, let's call it a blight. I mean, if you live there, you get to your home and you have fiber, but as soon as you get out on the driveway, you're not going to be able to pick up your phone and talk to anybody. So, or communicate or go order something from Amazon, or, it affects the whole society. And especially in my mind, it's public safety is probably number one right now for many reasons, that where we want it. So the real question, Brian, for me, and is, how will this start, and, who's going to drive it forward? I mean, will it be Congress, or would it be, industry, or would there be a group that would move this forward? Have you had any thoughts on that?
I do. And BEAD has actually sort of kickstarted, I think, what the future of this type of development and where it needs to come from, which is from the state level. So many of these programs flow down from the federal level, and whether it's federal money, maybe also included with some state money in some cases, you have state broadband offices now. You've got state broadband offices that are now talking about decreasing staff now that they've got this phase out of the way, and now we just sort of need to watch as the plans roll out and these ISPs build out. These state broadband offices need to continue to be maintained by the states. This is economic development. That's what connectivity brings, is economic development. And that includes fixed and it includes wireless. And we've now built up expertise at the state level where people are far more connected with what's happening in the local communities and understand, what has good coverage, what doesn't have good coverage, what has good broadband, what doesn't have good broadband. Where does the state want to invest in the next economic development areas? These are things that are beyond the federal purview for the most part. And so it really is going to take a partnership, a continued partnership between the federal government and these state broadband offices. And for the states that just decide to turn the dial down and ignore their state broadband offices and what they've built there in terms of expertise and the
Yeah,
connections that they have with the local communities, they're
yeah,
going to suffer from it. And the states that maintain the broadband offices, the states that maintain those broadband offices and keep them active and understand where these federal dollars can go, that can advocate for more federal dollars for their service areas and
right.
listen to the local communities in terms of what those needs are, those are the states that are going to make the most progress in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, I really like your idea. I mean, because the state police, report up to the state capitol, and and so does the broadband office. I mean, I think you're on to something there. But so we're sort of wrapping up here, our time that we have, and I'm so glad that you've come on board into on the podcast, and it's great to see you as always in real life or on video. But I wanted to just ask, one kind of like overriding question, in terms of you're out there, you're seeing the country, you're seeing the world. If there's any kind of one thing, and we've talked about one area of improvement, but if there's any one area of improvement, or if you see where we're going, with AI and the data centers and all the work that's being done, how do you see the industry uniquely, in your view, moving forward? What area do we need to work on moving forward, other than the rural area that we just talked about?
There's so much talk about data centers right now. There's a lot of controversy. Nobody wants one in their backyard, just like nobody wants a tower in their backyard. We've got to figure this out. I understand and respect that people don't want the noise. There's concerns about, the pollution, water usage, and things like that. And this is something that needs a lot of attention, because all of these wonderful, seemingly magical technologies that are coming to fruition are going to have to be supported by connectivity, by fiber, by towers, and by the data centers that are going to run and control and help with autonomous vehicles, with drones, with the AI. And we have to take a holistic approach. And I don't think that that's being done particularly well right now. And we've got permitting issues, even with getting the broadband fiber across a railroad track or pole access.
Yeah,
In addition to, I don't want that tower. I don't want to see that tower from my backyard. We're going to have to come to terms with these things, and satellites, as wonderful as they are, aren't going to solve all of them. So how do we get more capacity, more roll out more spectrum availability
yeah,
for the mobile operators, for the satellite providers as well, in order to handle this deluge of data capacity requirements that we're facing. And so I know we've touched on parts of this already during the conversation, but I think we do have to very much take an overall holistic approach and figure out how we're going to solve these problems and where we're going to put these assets that are going
yeah,
to drive this connectivity.
yeah. Well, you'll be a part of that because of what you've got in terms of your real time, I will call it, actual usage data that you helped birth literally from your mosaic start. So you should be quite
Now,
proud.
Barlow, I
Quite
don't
proud
want
of
to take
this.
too much credit here. The Ookla folks acquired my company, and there's a lot of smart people here, and there's a lot of work that's gone into not only the technology and the methodology, but imagine, I mean, we're getting a billion readings, over a billion readings a day, RF readings that are coming in that help us map and understand where these networks are good and where they need improvement. It's a global operation with around 600 or so employees that make this data, turn this data into actionable insights for our commercial customers, the wireless operators, cable and fiber companies, as well as regulators around the world who depend upon this data to understand where these investments need to be made.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. I'm all for you. So looking forward to seeing you at the next conference. And I hope you have a good summer. Don't get too hot down there in Memphis.
Oh, it's
Next
Memphis.
summer.
It's on the brochure, Barlow. It's on the brochure. It's going to be hot.
All right. Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Good. Okay. Take care.
Thank you.